The courtroom was packed. Tension buzzed in the air like static. People whispered, papers rustled, and the heavy wooden doors creaked every time someone entered. At the center of it all, seated high above like a king on a throne, was Judge Henry Braxton, a man known not for fairness, but for fear. Everyone in the county had heard stories. He'd ruled from the bench for nearly 20 years, dismissing cases with a scowl, interrupting defense attorneys mid-sentence, punishing anyone who dared question his authority. Some called him strict. Others called him a tyrant. But one thing was certain: no one had ever humiliated him. Until today, in front of him stood Monica Ellis, a poised, soft-spoken black woman in her mid-30s, dressed neatly in a navy blazer. She was a local business owner, ran a small coffee shop on 5th Street. She wasn't rich, she wasn't famous, but she was brave. And she was tired of being stepped on. She was here fighting an unjust eviction, brought against her by a shady property developer with deep political ties. Her lease had mysteriously been terminated, and despite doing everything by the book, she found herself dragged into court. Everyone expected Judge Braxton to brush her off, the way he always did. But what he said shocked even the most hardened lawyers in the room. "Ms. Ellis," he said, leaning forward with a twisted smile, "maybe if you spent less time playing entrepreneur and more time understanding the law, you wouldn't be wasting my time." A few people shifted uncomfortably. "I've seen your type before. Come in here acting like you're owed something. This isn't some charity case. This is real court." The room fell dead silent. The words hung in the air like smoke. Monica didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened. Her hands, folded in front of her, trembled slightly. Braxton leaned back, satisfied. "Case dismissed," he barked, slamming his gavel. And then it happened. 2 men in suits stood up from the back row, calm, steady. One of them reached into his coat and flashed a badge. "Judge Braxton," the taller one said, his voice echoing through the stunned courtroom, "we're with the Department of Justice. You are under arrest for obstruction of justice, bribery, and abuse of power." The room gasped. Even Monica's eyes widened. Judge Braxton's face went pale. You can't be serious," he stammered, trying to stand. "This is my courtroom." "Not anymore," the agent replied. The courtroom that had once bowed to Braxton's will now watched in stunned silence as he was handcuffed and led away. But this story was far from over. Monica Ellis had never wanted to be a fighter. She just wanted to build something of her own, something that would last. 3 years ago, she opened Ellis Grounds, a cozy coffee shop tucked between a laundromat and a thrift store in a quiet part of town. It wasn't fancy, but it had soul. Locals loved it. Veterans, students, single moms, retirees. They all found a little peace there. She gave out free coffee to the homeless every Friday, and she hired kids fresh out of high school who needed a second chance. It was never about getting rich. It was about building community. And maybe that's why it was targeted. When a massive real estate company called Lintham Development Group suddenly bought the block, Monica's shop became a problem. They wanted her out, fast. First, it was mysterious plumbing issues. Then, code violations that had never existed before. And finally, an eviction notice taped to her window, claiming she had violated lease terms. But Monica had receipts. She had paid every bill on time, kept her building spotless. She had followed every rule. So she fought back. She filed to challenge the eviction, prepared her case herself, and walked into that courtroom thinking, maybe justice still works in this country. She had no idea what kind of judge she was about to face. Judge Braxton had a long history with Lintham Development. He used to serve on their legal advisory board before becoming a judge, and, though it was never formally disclosed, everyone in city politics knew they funded his campaigns quietly through backdoor donations. Monica was walking straight into a trap, but she refused to back down. "I didn't open my shop to roll over," she told her sister the night before the hearing. "I opened it because I believed I could be part of something better. And I'm not leaving just because someone with a bigger checkbook says so." Her sister Ava had been worried. "Monica, people like him don't play fair." Monica looked her in the eyes. "Then I'll stop playing scared." She walked into that courtroom alone. No lawyer, no backing, just her voice, her evidence, and her truth. But even truth wasn't enough for Judge Braxton. His mind had already been made up before she even opened her mouth. Still, what he didn't know was that he was already being watched, and his arrogance would be his downfall. Judge Braxton had built his empire on intimidation. Over the years, hundreds of people, many of them poor, minorities, or small business owners like Monica, had walked into his courtroom hoping for justice, only to leave crushed, silenced, or scared. Lawyers warned their clients not to argue with him. Reporters had once tried to investigate rumors of misconduct, but they hit brick walls. Complaints disappeared. Witnesses backed off. And that's exactly how Braxton liked it. Fear kept him safe. Fear kept him powerful. Behind the bench, he didn't just rule, he controlled. His decisions favored big corporations, wealthy developers, political donors. Monica's case? Just another line item to sweep under the rug. But this time, he underestimated his opponent. Because Monica wasn't just another name on the docket. Her quiet defiance had caught someone's attention. Months earlier, an anonymous whistleblower had contacted the Department of Justice. They claimed Judge Braxton was fixing cases, taking bribes, not just once, but repeatedly. Over a dozen rulings were flagged. Most involved vulnerable defendants, tenants, single mothers, small business owners, just like Monica. Federal agents had launched a covert investigation. They attended court sessions, pulled financial records, interviewed past victims. And when they heard Monica's case was coming up, they decided to watch in person. 2 of them, dressed in plain suits, had slipped into the courtroom that morning and quietly taken seats near the back. They weren't there to interfere. They were there to see the corruption happen in real time. And Braxton delivered. From the moment Monica began speaking, the judge barely looked at her documents. He interrupted her, twisted her words, rolled his eyes at her evidence. Then he went too far, with that smug, racially charged insult. That one sentence, so ugly, so revealing, and was exactly what the agents needed. Not just proof of bias, but a clear abuse of power. Captured in a public courtroom. They didn't need to wait any longer. As Braxton barked, "Case dismissed," and raised his gavel, the 2 men rose calmly and walked forward. The moment they revealed their badges, everything in the room shifted. Gasps echoed. Phones came out. Braxton's confident smirk melted into confusion, and then fear. He had no idea the DOJ had been watching, and now all the walls he'd built over 2 decades were about to collapse around him. As they read him his rights, Braxton sputtered, "This is a mistake. I am the law in this county." "No," one of the agents replied, gripping his arm. "Not anymore." As Judge Braxton was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the room was still frozen in stunned silence. Some people looked away, unsure of what they'd just witnessed. Others pulled out their phones, filming with shaky hands. A few even clapped softly. But Monica Ellis just stood still. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Justice had come, but it felt complicated, heavy, like the weight she carried wasn't gone yet, only shifting. The federal agents gave her a respectful nod before following Braxton out. One of them even paused near her and said quietly, "We've been watching him for a long time. Thank you for standing up." She nodded, but didn't speak. Her throat tightened, because deep down, this wasn't just about the coffee shop. It was about her mother. Monica had grown up just a few blocks from that same courthouse. Her mother, Loretta Ellis, had raised 3 kids on her own, working double shifts as a janitor in that very building. She used to come home exhausted, her hands raw from chemicals, her back aching from scrubbing courtrooms, where justice was only for the rich. When Monica was a teenager, she remembered one night vividly. Her mother came home crying. A judge had yelled at her for mopping too slowly after hours. "Said I was lucky to even have a job," Loretta had whispered, "like I wasn't a human being." That judge? Henry Braxton. Monica never forgot that name, never forgot the pain in her mother's voice, never forgot how powerless they both felt. That memory had been locked away for years, until the day Monica stood in front of Braxton herself, when she saw the same cold look in his eyes, heard the same arrogance in his tone. It all came flooding back. She wasn't just fighting for her business. She was fighting for her mother, for every working-class woman who was ever told to sit down, shut up, and be grateful for less. But now, standing in the courtroom, as Braxton's seat sat empty for the first time in 2 decades, Monica realized something else. Her fight wasn't over, because just hours later, she'd receive a call from a local news station. The video of Braxton's arrest had gone viral. Millions of views, hundreds of comments. People were sharing their own stories, naming names, coming forward after years of silence. A movement was beginning, and Monica was at the center of it. By the next morning, Monica's name was everywhere. Her quiet act of courage, standing her ground, refusing to be broken, had turned into a symbol. Local news anchors called her the woman who stood tall when the system crumbled. Social media flooded with clips from the courtroom. Hashtags trended. Strangers donated to her business. Some even called her a hero. But not everyone was cheering. Lintham Development Group, the powerful real estate company that had pushed for Monica's eviction, was watching closely. And they weren't happy. Behind closed doors, board members scrambled. If Judge Braxton was arrested, what would investigators find in his records? What emails? What phone calls? Because Lintham hadn't just benefited from his rulings. They'd helped shape them. Over the years, they'd quietly paid off campaign donations, sent expensive gifts to Braxton's private residence, and used shell companies to buy off other local officials. Braxton had been their shield. Now, he was a liability. Within 48 hours of his arrest, Monica received her first threat. A voicemail. No caller ID, just a calm, robotic voice. "Careful who you think you're taking down. Some names don't belong in courtrooms, they belong in shadows." She played it 3 times, then deleted it. But the warning echoed in her head. She knew standing up came with a price. But this was a war she hadn't asked for. Later that day, a woman walked into her coffee shop. Mid-40s, sharp suit, confident walk. She introduced herself as Nina Caldwell, a civil rights attorney. "I saw what happened," she said. "You stood alone in that courtroom, But you won't stand alone anymore." Monica was hesitant at first. She had never trusted lawyers, especially not after Braxton. But something about Nina felt different. She had fire in her eyes, but warmth in her voice. Nina sat across from her and said, "You're not just part of a story anymore. You are the story. And there's a battle coming. If we don't act fast, the people behind Braxton will bury everything." "What do they want from me?" Monica asked quietly. "Silence," Nina said. "They want you scared and off the radar." But Monica wasn't scared. Not anymore. "I'm not disappearing," she said. "Not after everything my family has been through. Not after what I saw in that courtroom." Nina smiled. "Good. Then let's make sure Judge Braxton is just the beginning." That night, Monica sat alone in her shop after closing. She looked out the window at the quiet street and thought about her mother, about the janitor who once cried in silence, and the daughter who now had the power to speak for her. What had started as a fight for her business had become something else entirely, a fight to change everything. The storm didn't take long to arrive. Within days, Monica's phone was ringing nonstop. Interview requests, support messages, and warnings. Anonymous emails flooded her inbox. A local journalist leaked a list of names, judges, city officials, developers, all connected to Braxton in one way or another. The entire system was under a microscope. And Monica? She had become the face of it all. Not everyone was happy about that. On a Tuesday morning, just before opening her shop, Monica arrived to find her windows shattered. A rock still lay on the floor inside with a note attached. "Stop talking." She stared at it for a long moment, then swept the glass aside, unlocked the door, and flipped the open sign. 2 hours later, a news crew showed up. She gave them the rock and let them record the broken windows. "I'm not afraid of glass," she told them. "I'm afraid of silence." Meanwhile, Nina Caldwell was gathering victims. People who had been quietly crushed by Braxton's rulings. Families evicted. Businesses bankrupted. Young men wrongfully sentenced. The deeper she dug, the more horrifying it became. Braxton hadn't just been corrupt. He'd been weaponized. But for every step forward, the backlash grew. A powerful city councilman, rumored to be tied to Lintham, called for an ethics investigation into Monica, accusing her of staging a media circus for personal gain. One radio host called her a troublemaker with a martyr complex. Hate mail started arriving. At one point, Nina pulled her aside and asked, "Are you sure you want to keep going?" Monica looked her dead in the eyes. "I didn't come this far to bow now." So she kept pushing. And when she was invited to testify before a state judicial review panel, she accepted. That meant stepping into a bigger arena. TV cameras, senators, national media. But Monica didn't flinch. On the day of the hearing, she wore her mother's old church dress. Not because it looked professional, but because it gave her strength. And when it was her turn to speak, she told them everything. Not just what Braxton said in court, but what it felt like. The humiliation, the dismissiveness, the years of systemic dismissal that people like her had endured in silence. "My mother cleaned floors in this very system," she said, voice steady. "She was never seen, never heard. But today, I'm here to say, we see you now, and we won't be quiet anymore." The room went still. One of the panel members, an older judge with silver hair, quietly removed his glasses, visibly moved, and just like that, something shifted. Monica wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for a generation. The days that followed Monica's testimony felt like watching a dam finally crack. By the end of the week, Judge Henry Braxton was officially indicted on multiple counts: bribery, obstruction of justice, racial discrimination, and ethics violations. Federal prosecutors released a statement calling his behavior a betrayal of public trust spanning over a decade. Monica read the headline twice, hardly believing it. But the real surprise came when the district attorney's office announced a full review of every case Braxton had presided over in the last 15 years. Hundreds of files reopened, dozens of unjust rulings reversed, families finally given back homes, formerly incarcerated men brought home to their children. The ripple effect was massive. Lintham Development Group's name came up in more than half the cases. Subpoenas followed. One executive resigned. Another was caught trying to flee the country. And then, as if the universe was finally tipping the scales, Monica received a call from her landlord's office. "Miss Ellis, we'd like to offer you a new lease under your original terms." She didn't yell. She didn't laugh. She simply said, "I'll have my attorney review it." Because now she knew her worth. The coffee shop reopened stronger than ever. People from all over town stopped by, not just for the drinks, but to thank her, to tell her their stories, to say, "You gave us courage." But Monica never let it get to her head. She swept the floors herself, served coffee with the same smile. The only difference, a small framed photo behind the counter, her mother, Loretta, standing outside the courthouse years ago, mop in hand, back straight, and beside it, a quote that read, "Silence protects the powerful, but truth frees the brave." Nina Caldwell, the attorney who had stood by her side, continued to represent more victims. She launched a nonprofit legal team dedicated to fighting systemic injustice. She asked Monica to join the board. At first, Monica hesitated. "I'm just a small business owner," she said. "No," Nina smiled. "You're the reason this whole thing started. You're the proof that ordinary people can change everything." And so, Monica agreed. She didn't need a title. She didn't want fame. But if her voice could help one more person stand up, she was in. Some stories don't end with fireworks or headlines. Sometimes they end quietly, like the first morning you wake up and realize the weight you carried for years is finally gone. For Monica Ellis, that morning came on a Sunday. She walked into her coffee shop just after dawn, flipped the lights on, and stood alone for a moment, soaking in the silence. The windows were fixed. The shelves were full. The smell of fresh beans and hope filled the air. She walked over to the photo of her mother behind the counter and smiled. "We did it, Mama," she whispered. "We made them listen." Not long after, Ava walked in, carrying her toddler daughter, and handed Monica a newspaper. The headline read, "The Woman Who Changed the Courtroom." Monica chuckled softly. "I didn't change it. I just cracked it open." But that's how change begins, with a crack, a single, stubborn refusal to stay silent. What started as a fight for a coffee shop turned into something far bigger. It became a symbol, a reckoning, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the system, truth still matters, and when truth finds a voice, it echoes. Judge Henry Braxton will never sit on the bench again. His legacy now serves as a warning. Power built on fear eventually collapses. And the people you thought were powerless, they remember, they rise. And Monica, she didn't become a politician. She didn't run for office. She just kept showing up at neighborhood forums, at justice panels, at small protests, for people going through the same fight she once faced. And every now and then, someone would ask, "How did you stay so brave?" She'd smile and say, "I wasn't always brave. I was just tired of being quiet. Sometimes the loudest revolution starts with the softest voice, one that refuses to disappear. So the next time someone tells you to stay in your place, the next time someone tries to silence you, remember Monica Ellis, the woman who stood alone in a courtroom and walked out, leading a movement."